In 1999, the U.S. recorded music industry was the biggest it had ever been, $14.6 billion in annual sales. Most of that came from physical formats, CDs, cassettes, small but devoted vinyl crowd, the infrastructure for selling those things. Record stores, big box music sections, mall chains was a real piece of American retail. By 2009, 10 years later, U.S. recorded music revenue had fallen to about $7.5 billion. Half the industry was gone. The buildings that housed it, most of them, were already closed. Tower Records was one of those buildings, founded by Russ Solomon in Sacramento in 1960. At its peak, around 1999, close to 200 stores worldwide with international outlets in Japan, the UK, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and a handful of other markets. Roughly $1.1 billion in annual revenue. The Sunset Strip flagship was one of the most photographed retail storefronts in the United States. By the end of 2006, Tower Records was liquidating. The popular story about Tower Records is that they were killed by Napster, and then iTunes, and then file sharing, and then the iPod. That story's correct. Most of the time on this channel, I'm telling you the popular story is incomplete. This episode is the one where the popular story is the right one, and the framework's job is to confirm it honestly. The fifth case study in the four forces. Quick recap. Every company is shaped by four forces: market, the conditions they operate in; money, how they're funded, and what that costs them; management, the decisions made at the top; moment, the timing and events they didn't choose. All four are always present. Only one is decisive. Let's find Tower Records. The recorded music industry through the 1990s was one of the most lucrative consumer categories in modern history. CDs cost about 70 cents to manufacture and sold at retail for $15 to $18. The margins at every layer were enormous. Labels made money, distributors made money, and specialty retailers like Tower Records made very good money. That ended in two waves. The first wave was Napster, which launched in 1999. Napster wasn't a business. It was a peer-to-peer file sharing service that allowed any college student with a broadband connection to download essentially the entire CD library, free, in compressed digital files. Napster was sued out of existence by 2001, but by the time Napster was gone, the cultural shift had happened. The expectation that recorded music should be acquired as a digital file, not a physical disc, was now permanent. The shutdown of Napster did not return customers to record stores. The second wave was the legal alternative. iTunes launched in 2003 with the iTunes Music Store and the iPod. Songs were 99 cents, albums were $10. iTunes did not bring the old margins back. It just made digital music a place where the labels could earn something instead of nothing. The retail layer, including Tower Records, was simply not in this picture. By 2005, U.S. album sales were falling at roughly at 10% a year. By 2010, they had fallen by half. A retailer whose entire business was selling physical albums had no path that did not require becoming a different kind of company. This was not a market headwind. This was a market cancellation. The category Tower Records was and stopped existing as a viable retail proposition. Market decisive. Tower had real money problems, and they made the end faster, but they did not make the end inevitable. The market did that. Through the 1990s, Russ Solomon's company expanded internationally. Tokyo, London, Singapore, Argentina, Israel, Mexico, using debt to finance the build-outs. The international stores were impressive but rarely profitable on a steady-state basis. By the late 1990s, Tower was carrying about $110 million in long-term debt against a U.S. business that was about to face the worst category collapse in modern retail history. In 2004, Tower filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for the first time. They restructured the debt and emerged. By 2006, with industry sales still falling and no real path to recovery, they filed Chapter 11 again. This time, the bankruptcy court ordered a liquidation. The chain was sold piece by piece. Most of the stores closed by the end of 2006. The international debt and the overexpansion are real management and financial mistakes. A leaner, debt-free Tower might have lasted another 2 or 3 years, but another 2 or 3 years is not survival. It's a slower funeral. This is the part that matters for the framework. The money mistakes affected the timing of the end. They did not change the destination. The destination was set by the market. Money, an accelerant, not the cause. Russ Solomon was a real founder. The Tower Records that existed in 1995 was a piece of American retail unlike anything else. Staffed by people who knew their genres, organized like a library, open until midnight. The cultural weight wasn't an accident. The management mistakes, overexpansion abroad, slow rid on the digital shift, holding too much inventory, are real. But they live inside a much harder question. What was a record store supposed to do in 2002? If Tower had pivoted to digital, what would that have meant? Tower didn't own a music label. Tower didn't have the technology stack. Apple, Microsoft, and Sony were the companies positioned to build the platforms that replaced retail. And even they had to negotiate with the labels for years to make it work. Tower starting a download service from inside a retail chain was never a credible business. If Tower had pivoted to live music or merchandise or experience retail, which is eventually what some surviving record stores did, they would have shrunk to maybe 1/10 of their footprint. That's not Tower Records. That's a different company that uses the Tower name. The honest read is that Tower's management didn't have a plausible path that would have saved the company. They had paths that would have softened the landing. None of them changed the outcome. Management, a contributor to the timing, not the cause. The moment force in this story is unusual. It's the same thing as the market force. Napster was a moment event. So was iTunes. So was the iPod. 3 product launches at 3 specific times that broke the existing distribution model. These weren't external shocks the way a recession is. They were the actual mechanism by which the market changed. When an entire category collapses, the moment events are the market shift. They're the same data point read at different time scales. The 2008 financial crisis arrived after Tower was already gone, so it doesn't enter the story. There's no recession to point at. There's no external scandal. The collapse was endogenous to the music business. Moment, the same thing as market, not separately decisive. So let's grade them out. Money accelerated the end. Management affected timing, not outcome. Moment tangled with market. Market decisive. Tower Records died because the market it served stopped existing, not shifted, not consolidated, not transferred to a digital channel. The category, physical music retail at consumer scale, collapsed by roughly half in a decade and continued to fall after that. There was no business model adjustment that survived that collapse. There was no leadership team smart enough to invent a different industry to be in. I want to spend a minute on why this episode matters for the framework. If every video on this channel finds a hidden money explanation or a hidden management explanation, the framework starts to feel like a lens that always sees the same thing. The point of having 4 forces instead of one favorite explanation is that some stories really are about the thing they look like they're about. The market really did vanish. The popular story really was right. The framework's job isn't to be contrarian. The framework's job is to be honest. Sometimes honest means upgrading a popular story. Sometimes it means confirming one. Tower Records is the second case. There's a smaller lesson under that. Most of the famous business deaths people argue about the disrupted retailers, the miss-the-shift incumbents, the fallen blue chips, happen in markets that are still alive. The market's changing, but customers still exist for some version of what the company sells. That's why management and money usually become decisive in those stories. There's a survivable path, and the question is whether the company can find it. Tower Records didn't have a survivable path. That's rarer than it sounds. And it's the reason Tower's story belongs on this channel, to mark the place where the framework lands on the obvious answer, and to make clear that the framework is willing to. Next case, a company that watched Toys R Us make exactly the wrong move with Amazon, and then made the same move worse and earlier.